not my great-great-grandfather.
Oh.
We've skipped a couple of generations because I was the last in each one coming down. My father was 50 when I was born. His father was 56 when he was born. And then his father, by Sylvester Pendleton Clarke, Sylvester Pendleton Clarke was 58 when Henry Clarke was born. So it was just really Civil War, Revolutionary War. And Sylvester Pendleton Clarke was born in 1780. He helped survey for the Erie Barge Canal, so he knew where it was going to go. And then he decided, after the War of 1812, to buy Grand Island from the Indians. And the state of New York said that he didn't have a right to buy that island. So the second time, they actually sent 55 militia on the island, burned 80 houses, and threw him off the island. But behind the scenes, they knew that he could sue them, because to this day, the state of New York still pays the Indians for Grand Island. So they gave him money, and he was able to go to an English company that owned most of northern New York back in those days. He bought 138 acres first, built the inn where the canal was finishing up at this end, and then in between there and Lockport was all granite. So it was thought that they would not, it'd be years and years before they could cut through that granite and make it a completed canal. That's why he built a big lodge that could feed 200 people and the rest of it here. They couldn't afford dynamite from Europe, but they found some other method of making dynamite here in the United States. They were able to expand it and open the canal much sooner than was expected. And at that point, he bought another, he had 300 acres finally in the whole area. So that's a quick history. I mean, I think I'll just open it to questions. I mean, the one sad thing, I came here in 2001 and met Marty Gilbert, and I gave him a diary kind of journal that my great-grandfather kept. And one of the interesting parts about it was that he had a number of Indian remedies for things to do. And I took that to a doctor friend of mine, and he said, yeah, that's a prescription drug today. That's a prescription drug today. That's an over-the-counter drug today. That's an over-the-counter drug today. So you have that in your museum, and I gave a watercolor painting that I had of him and some of that kind of stuff back in right after 2001. I actually was living on a 38-foot sailboat at that time. I sailed back down the Hudson River. I was in the harbor, watched the airplanes go in on 9/11.
Oh, wow.
So all that same year. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you live?
I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I still have a sailboat that I keep in St. Simons, Georgia, which is right on the Florida-Georgia border. It's about a 4.5-hour drive from our house. This is my partner, Sharon Reeves.
Hi.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
And behind is my high school and college brother and the rest of it, and friend, and he's a professional photographer also.
Nice.
And we're traveling from New York, running through the whole Erie Barge Canal, and then ending up in Toronto.
In a car, not a boat.
I've
He's done it in a boat.
done it a few times in a boat. I had a 51-foot sailboat that I brought from above Detroit through the canal in 1983, and then I did it twice in my 38-foot sailboat. So, yeah.
What was your professional career?
Well, it probably is kind of like him. I made my money selling and brokering large tracts of land and putting together, and actually had to at one point develop a 252-acre tract, so almost his same size. When the market crashed back between 19 1974 and 78. And I built a log house on the land and was able to put enough together to save the other tracts of land. And my dream came true. I bought a 51-foot sailboat and sailed down to the Caribbean and got my captain's license and was gonna run it in the charter business. Unfortunately, you can't make any money in that, but I had a lot of fun trying.
Do you have any children?
I do not,
Okay.
no.
So that's the end of the line for that part.
It is, except that I have a half-brother who fought 5 years in World War II in the Pacific, and he has one son. But he's not married, and he's 56 years old, so I don't know.
Not too late.
Sounds like
There are a lot of daughters that have children and grandchildren and stuff, but it's just, it's worked out that way. My ex-wife couldn't have children, and I knew that when I got married, so.
Was Pendleton Clarke, Sylvester Pendleton Clarke, a sir? Did he have sir in front of his name?
No.
No.
No, not that I know of.
It's always been my understanding that he actually, because of the granite, that he was thought about building a trench or a portage to get supplies from the canal to the creek. Did you ever hear that?
Yeah, well, what they did was they had the carriage line system that ran from Lockport down to here, where the canal continued on out. And they ran that back and forth.
The road still exists, it's called East Canal Road.
Okay, yeah, okay.
That's the portage.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that's the way, and he just expected that to go on for maybe 10 or 15 years, and instead they opened the canal, I guess.
5 years later.
Yeah, something like that, quickly, yeah.
What did your father and your grandfather do? You're a real estate individual, and Sylvester Pendleton Clarke was a real estate entrepreneur. How about the two in between?
My dad's father was a conductor on the railroad. They lived in Buffalo, New York. Sylvester Pendleton Clarke envisioned this to be the Buffalo at the time. It just didn't work out that way. My dad was vice president of McGraw-Hill, he was an editor as well as did all their sales for them and stuff. So, different areas. I started off kind of looking in working for corporations, and I just decided I didn't want to go the corporate route and that kind of thing. And so I bought a Corvette and traveled around the United States with the money I had saved up for a year. And I sold the Corvette and I traveled around the world for a year. And that's where I decided to go into real estate, as well as I wanted to be more outdoors and that type of stuff. And with large tracts of land, you're walking and riding motorcycles over it and all that kind of stuff to help sell it.
Where was Sylvester born?
He was born in
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Yeah, because if you go back, I mean, my dad did a whole research of the family. Back in 1970, I met him coming back from Australia, and we did it all over England, and were able to run it down. The original Clarke was in the King's Court and got Roger Williams, Rhode Island. Okay, and then he came over here, and if you know the history of Rhode Island, it was very strict religious, and if you didn't abide by that, you were banished to the south part of Rhode Island. And apparently he wasn't, and I always say he probably had a lot more fun living the rest of his life down there. And so that goes to that Clarke generation, and then the Pendleton is the same Pendleton on the mother's side that it is the Pendleton shirt people that moved out to Oregon later on. And that Pendleton was also a privateer, meaning during our Revolutionary War, he was privateers are just where a country says that you can be a pirate. And so that's really what he was. And then he ended up having an inn in North Carolina, a bar and inn that he ran.
What could you tell us about the original old settlement? It's our understanding that originally he had a log cabin near, like now it's Uncle G's, an ice cream place, and several other homes belong to the family, I believe. The house that I live in now, that I've renovated, belonged to a Lucy Wire. Would you have any knowledge of her? I heard that she was an in-law of Pendleton.
She is, and I think she's buried somewhere not too far from here. And I'm trying to remember, in 2001, I kind of ran that down and we found her grave, and I apologize, that was a long time ago when we drove around.
And also he had a brother-in-law that was like the first judge, Wire. That's where Lucy came in, they were married, or would you have any knowledge of
That part I don't know.
Uh-huh.
I don't know on that. Maybe somebody else can help.
Well, I'm kind of interested in the first part of the question that he had, as far as exactly where was the log cabin?
My understanding is that the log cabin is more where that, what's the,
Where the cemetery is, close by.
Yes,
Yeah,
and the ice cream
right.
shop.
Yeah,
It's in that little
where,
neighborhood.
What's her name's house, at the end of the street?
Sarah?
Well, the other house.
Oh, that was torn down?
Well, Lombardo.
Lombardo's house.
In that area, that's where, that was the harbor area. That's where people were, boats were.
and if you, where the cemetery is right where the old canal was.
Yeah.
When you look at the old
Yeah.
Okay.
thing. And so my understanding was it was down there and he built a log house, a log lodge. And then within a year and a half, he had a large frame building built, because it could seat 200 people, for meals. He envisioned a lot of traffic, and they had that. I mean, in that same book that I gave to the historic, he has a punch that he does for New Year's Eve, and it's 1/2 a keg of gin, 1/4 keg of brandy, something else, an 1/8 of a keg, and, just mix it up and everybody drink it.
If you think about the village was like a gold rush town, it came, people flooded in like thousands in a second, and within a year, when the gold left, the city evaporated. That's what happened to the village.
Yeah.
And when the canal was finished, the village just disappeared because there's no one needed.
That's right.
Because every person that came in the canal from Europe and all the goods, services from the west coast, east coast, had to stop at that village to unload, get on a cart, and drive up 5 miles to Lockport and load, back and forth until the, what do you call it, the escarpment was finished. So that, like Times Square there.
Yeah.
Thousands of people a day were going through there.
Exactly, no, and see, he thought that was gonna last for,
Yeah.
15, 20 years kind of thing. And then it probably might have developed as a Buffalo kind of
Yeah.
area. It didn't.
In the beginning, you were talking about the 80 houses that were burned down in Grand Island.
Mm-hmm.
Was your great-grandfather not eventually the
Governor.
governor of Grand Island
It was from the
Self-proclaimed.
beginning,
from the beginning?
yeah.
So how did that all,
Well, what happened was, if you wanna go behind the scenes on this thing, he was avoiding taxes by saying that he was a separate country. And so there was a guy named Vanderbilt that was just developing his railroad, and he was grinding the grain and stuff that was coming here, and Vanderbilt wanted to run it further on. He was also selling the first cut timber to a Canadian lumber company, which did not make a Boston lumber company happy. So they lobbied the New York State, and they went and took him off the island. with sheriffs and militia and stuff. And everybody said after they were off the island, they said, well, why didn't, no fight or anything? What's wrong? He said, they didn't say anything about not going back on. So they went back on, and it took them another 3 years. And at that point, they had 55 militia come on and put them off and burned 80 houses down. And then he had already surveyed for the Erie Barge Canal, so he knew where it was gonna be. And then he came and bought the land. And actually, that, I hadn't thought about that. That's true. That's how I retired early. I retired 21 years ago. I'm 75 years old, so. I bought a piece of land, 21 acres, that ended up being right next to what we call the Mall of Georgia, which was the second biggest mall east of the Mississippi River built back in that time. And I got to retire early. And I pinched myself for about 2 years, but I couldn't believe it had all happened. But, yeah, I was very fortunate.
So what were you doing in Australia? You intrigued me when you told us that you were in Australia.
On the trip around the world, I ended up staying, in that year, I stayed 6 months in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. I had a fraternity brother that was living there and working. And I really kind of fell in love with Australia, liked it. And then I came back and I made a lot of money in real estate. And I decided that I was gonna do 6 months in Australia, 6 months in Atlanta, and do an endless summer so that it would be very nice. And I actually did that in '73. I set it up, and then we had the crash of land in the United States, and actually Australian land went even down worse than that. We had, in Atlanta, land went down 50%. It's a very wild ride that you do when you play that game, and I didn't like it particularly, but I was good at it, and that's how I could make my money. The other things were, going off for 2.5 years trying to make a living as a captain on my own sailboat and that kind of stuff. Anybody else?
Now, so then the name from our town comes from your great-grandfather's mother's side of the family? You said the Pendleton came from the mother's side of the family?
That's correct.
Okay. And then what about Sylvester Pendleton Clarke's wife?
He had two. He had, I don't know the pronunciation exactly,
Teresa.
We've
Leslie,
got
you have the list.
genealogy thing that has the name of her. She had, what I've always been told were that she had 6 children, and that she died on that 6th child's in childbirth. And then Lucy Wakefield, who had 12 children. Yeah, he was still,
It wasn't much else
he was still having kids at 62 years old. So,
That's how you got to be.
so she is from Rhode Island actually also, where he was from originally. And I don't know exactly how they met again, but after his first wife died in childbirth.
How many children are left? Any? Other than you?
Your brother,
Yeah, my brother, I
Brother?
guess. Yeah.
And then
2 years
your-
older than me.
your nieces and your nephew.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
And that, well, my half-brother, he's got 3 daughters, he has 3 daughters and a son. And the son is the one that's 56 now, so I don't know. He might still, I mean, we have it in the genes. We'll wait and see.
Even on the Pendleton side, or you don't follow that line as close?
Well, I know the Pendleton line just to the point of the privateer, and then the fact that Pendleton went out finally and established the Pendleton shirts, the wool shirts, and all that industry that's still going today. Other than that, I don't know a lot about that. Why it was Pendleton, rather than, you know, I guess just because the name worked, real estate, thinking about it, you're gonna try and sell, because he sold tracts of land with this thing, I mean, is what he did. He developed it, got the post office to come in, he becomes the postmaster, and he's selling tracts of land. He's giving tracts of land to his children, who are living here in some cases also. And then you've got the small Clarke Cemetery, that I'm interested in seeing it. I saw it in 2001. I think the monument, I think, has fallen over. I had it reset, but
It's not falling over anymore.
it's
all
up
fixed.
again. Well, good for him.
There's a
Yep.
picture of it right over there.
Yeah,
Ah, yes.
that's
Yeah,
from
yeah.
last year.
That was last year.
Oh, wow. No, so it's been way cleaned up again
has.
from, what it was even in 2001. Oh, how nice. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I paid
The
750.
Boy Scouts for a majority of that.
Did they? Okay.
Ah.
I know Marty was working with them, and I paid $750 for a company to come back in and try and do it back then in 2001.
Pretty good.
But that's great that it's carrying on then.
Did you see this case on the plaque?
You know, just a little bone of contention of mine is that Pendleton Clarke, Sylvester Pendleton Clarke, was the postmaster, and we are not allowed to have our own zip code. We are Northtown of Wando or Lockport. We have these little dinky towns, like, you just Java, North Java, they each have their own. Don't get me going on that. But anyway, it's a little bone of contention of mine that we don't have it.
Well, he's always been known as being pretty feisty. Maybe he hacked off the post office. It's still carrying on
Possibility.
generation to generation. I don't know.
That the whole area down there around East Canal Road and where Uncle Gene's is, that's where the old canal, Sylvester Pendleton Clarke had laid that out. That's all I see the whole map. of
Yeah, I
all the
had that
lots.
map,
You have the
actually. I
map,
have the
they're
map
all
of that, yeah.
about 60 feet by 100 or 120
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a whole community he laid out, and the streets and everything that was in there, because he was gonna make his money on that format.
He was.
Mortgage.
Right.
He didn't think that they'd ever last through that.
I know. That was his hope, obviously.
Mhm.
But it didn't work out that way. Yeah. Yeah, and I did, to save my real estate things, I had 400 big tracts of land with my family in it, my parents, my brother, and other investors. And I ended up having to develop this 252 acres in 1978. And no bank would look at me for money. I got a Swiss consortium to lend me the money to do 2 miles of paved road, and I've done kind of what I've seen some happening here. I made them 1 to 3 acre size tracts of land, and put that in. And then I quickly developed a second one, and I bought the sailboat. Always liking to travel and get away, not work as hard, I guess, or whatever.
Well, I want everyone to come up and have stuff, because we got a whole bunch of stuff and we can mingle with you
Sure.
a little bit more.
I would
Yeah.
like to get a picture of everybody back here